Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. My name is Nadja Diaz. I'm a white woman in my 40s. I'm wearing black trousers, a blue shirt today, and my reading glasses. I also do wear a necklace that reads the word persist, which I thought is quite fitting for today. I identify as non-disabled. I've been asked to share my observations as an independent producer and consultant who's supported and worked for nearly 20 years now with performance makers, particularly disabled artists across the UK, specifically Scotland, and since 2017 from my hometown in Germany. My experience draws, amongst others, on my work with Claire Cunningham, with whom I've been collaborating with since 2014. And on that of London-based Kanduku Dance Company, one of the world's leading dance companies of disabled and non-disabled performers, with whom I worked with from 2005 to 2015. For those that don't know Claire, Claire is a Scottish self-identifying disabled performance maker who's been awarded the German Dance Award 21 for outstanding achievement in artistic development. Claire's award-winning productions have been performed across the world, from Athens to Trondheim to Madrid, and to Poznan, as well as outside Europe, from San Francisco to Taipei via Perth or Melbourne in Australia. Claire's latest work, thank you very much, features an ensemble of 4 disabled performers. It was co-produced and commissioned in 2019 by Manchester International Festival and National Theatre Scotland, with partners including Perth Festival, Hong Kong Festival, Dance Umbrella in London, and Tanzhaus NRW in Düsseldorf, Germany. And in its new 23 iteration with Kunsten Festival, with its premiere here last night, that maybe some have experienced. As a producer, I consider myself an ally and long-term partner to disabled artists. I aim to bring together all the different aspects and elements and partners required to make, tour, and present their work in ways that is artist-centered and guided by their rhythm of making and working. My focus is on productions that might challenge us and the way we experience the world. The productions may hold up a mirror for us to recognize that we are all part of the problem, that we have organized and structured how we live and work in ways that exclude those whose lived experiences differ. We've created barriers to participation and contribution, and it's now up to us as a sector and as policymakers to take responsibility, reduce barriers, change structures and processes to train, employ, fund, present, and co-produce disabled artists in a sustainable way. To address all aspects required to develop and sustain an artist's career would exceed today's session, and I therefore like to highlight only some key elements that have supported us in building a producing structure for Claire Cunningham and her body of work as an independent disabled artist. I do have to say that this is not an exhaustive list, nor does it mean that we are not faced with ongoing struggles when addressing additional costs, capacity, and resources required to work in accessible and inclusive ways. I hope that we can take some of these examples and build upon them. So I'd like to start firstly that we have benefited from having in Creative Scotland a national funding body that states disability and diversity as one of their priorities, and that runs a project funding program that is not production and not outcome focused, but one that supports and encourages research and artistic development. To me, this lays the groundwork for new artistic endeavors and ideas to flourish, and is specifically relevant to disabled artists, as they often enter their chosen art form through non-standardized routes due to a lack of accessible training opportunities and courses. So, for example, we can incorporate studio and research time in our project funding applications that are targeted specifically at individual disabled artists' specific skills, encouraging development of practice, technique, as well as peer training amongst disabled artists. Another key element is that Creative Scotland's project funding has a year-round rolling application process and a project duration of up to 2 years, quite unusual in other countries in Europe. It's taking away time pressures, thereby fostering flexibility alongside planning security. This way of funding artists recognizes the need to fund producing capacity early on to approach national and international partners and presenters so that we can gain their buy-in to artistic risk-taking and project development. That subsequently leads to us being able to work together on co-productions that have co-production touring incorporated at the planning stage early on. Work can live longer and artists can tour their work over years, and it's not a one-off project we have to jump into and then already take on the next before we even have finished the first production. It should also be noted that artistic diversity and the work by disabled artists is primarily developed within the independent art scenes, outside larger institutions who tend to recruit from mainly inaccessible training institutions. We therefore require funding bodies that allocate larger proportions of their overall culture budget towards the independent sector, in which flexible working and producing models can be developed outside and away from rigid, inaccessible systems that we often find within state or city theaters and larger institutions. In addition to the way our national funding body has worked, we've also benefited from Unlimited, which is a UK-wide fund that is aimed exclusively at disabled artists. It's a strategic investment into disabled artists' practice to address the lack of disabled artists making and touring work. In Claire's case, we've not only been able to scale up her productions, but also start co-producing at international level thanks to Unlimited. We've been able to build a supportive producing and presenting structure that led to Claire's most successful production to date, with a total of 62 international performances at 26 venues. It's been one of the most crucial building blocks in Claire's career. On a more practical, yet not less important level, with Unlimited, we've started to work with dedicated access budgets. An access budget is separate now, for me, to a project budget, and that's what it needs to be. It's one of the most effective tools and the way to make the most significant impact on how we work, not only as artists and producers or presenters, but as a sector to work together to design more accessible projects, ensure accessible working conditions, and reduce barriers to our cultural offering by making it accessible to a diverse and therefore wider audience. It means we can declare our access costs separate to our organizational, production, artistic, and touring costs. It means we are not penalized for reducing barriers to work and for making our work accessible. We are not forced to compromise and reduce our artistic spend in order to include access. We don't have to pitch quality against access. To me, an access budget does level the playing field. It means one is not put at a disadvantage when working with disabled artists who may require different ways to travel, accessible studios or a personal assistant, or indeed just different working patterns. It also means that presenters, through their own access budgets, can share into the costs of making their program accessible. The responsibility does not lie with disabled artists alone anymore. With an access budget in place on both sides, we can be open about the costs incurred, but we can also insist that presenters pull their weight and take care of access, something that unfortunately still is often a rather difficult and drawn-out conversation to have. To end, I want to briefly highlight also the international aspects and relevance of our work. To sustain a career, most disabled artists, often making cutting-edge work, find their audiences in more urban and larger cities, and therefore rely on national and international partners as residency hosts, presenting partners, and co-producers. It's key that partners work together through international touring and producing networks, such as the one that's hosting the event today, so that they can use their own resources to take on the role of coordinating and strategically supporting artists. These networks can not only share in the costs and expertise, but also offer more effective ways of touring and project development, leading to long-term sustainable careers for artists and leading the way for sector change as a whole. So in summary, disabled artists require, firstly, a funding body with a regular project fund that is A, not production, but process focused on artistic development and diversity. B, is allowing flexible application deadlines and project timelines. And C, is allocating larger proportions of their funding towards the independent sector. Secondly, they require strategic investment through a dedicated funding program on a national level. Thirdly, access budgets are needed to level out the playing field across the entire cultural sector. And lastly, they require touring and producing partners and networks that use their own organizational resources to reduce barriers and support them on the artists' terms. We must recognize that we are part of the problem by having designed ableist systems and narratives that exclude, yet we can also be part of the solution as allies and partners. And earlier on, I got a little quote today, which I thought was quite fitting to end. It's by journalist Flora Rita Schreiner on starting before we feel ready. You're never ready for what you have to do. You just do it. That makes you ready. Thank you.